So when you go through EFT certification, you are introduced to 8 main acupressure points, and you guys all know what they are. They're at the top of the head here, 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 the collarbone points, and underarm points. Now, although you're introduced to 8, I got curious. I mean, if these are 8, I mean, are there more? And from some introductory research, it found out that there are over 400. And knowing that there's over 400, that's almost worse than not knowing that there's more than 8. Because what are you going to do with 400? Like, basically, you could bump into any portion of your body, and that's going to be an alternate acupressure point. But are those useful? Like, do they matter? Should I use them as a practitioner? And if I should, how? And in what combination? And so, how can I add these things in, or should I add these things in? Will it improve the quality of the sessions that I give, or is it going to distract from the quality of the sessions that I give? And those are the questions that I started to get really curious about. And when I get really curious about something, I just find as much as I can to research about it. So I found every book that I could find associated with different acupressure points and started reading them, going through them, and distilling them. And essentially, I found 4 really good ones. So everything I'm going to talk to you about is a distillation, a synthesis, a combination of those 4 resources. And it's not just research. It was research with the intention of using these things within the context of a clinical EFT session. So it's not a great idea just to throw a bunch of stuff out there if you don't know the purpose behind it, the intention behind it, when to use it, and when not to. So when I go through all these things, it's more than just figuring out where these points are, but what are their potential uses? How can they fit into the stuff that I already do within my sessions? And then, how can I use them to augment, improve, enhance? These alternate acupressure points are not going to completely change the way that you work. They're not going to change what you do with other people. Those main 8 points and the different techniques associated with them, that's the bulk of the work. That's where you spend most of your time. But that does not mean that there isn't room around the edges to improve. There aren't different things that you could apply when you're having certain difficulties during a session, or when you want to help somebody ground and get calm enough to be able to access their problem and their issue in a way in which they can communicate it. And then once they experience a shift, what do you do with that? Because the goal here is not to just have some amazing experience on Zoom or in a session for that 60 minutes. That's nice. I mean, that feels good. And we want our clients to feel good. But where the real work is not within the session, it's the application in life. Can they take those shifts in both thought and in emotion, and can they apply them in their day-to-day life? Because once they're able to do that, and if they can then access those shifts that are made within session in their real world, well, that's when the difference happens. When you continually apply the shifts that you've experienced within a session to your day-to-day life, well, then you start to rewire your neural pathways. You start to think differently. And when you start to think differently, you start to feel differently. And if you start to think differently and feel differently, you're going to start to act differently. And when you can habituate that, you go from a temporary state to a permanent trait. You go from life was like this and can't be any other way to life is now like this. And now that's as natural to me as the problem was before. So I got curious and I started doing a bunch of research. And I read all those books and I started synthesizing all that information. And essentially I found that there were 43 different points that were highly effective according to these various resources, and also that these points were accessible and able to be used during an EFT session. I wanted these points to be synthesized into a single resource that you could reference during your sessions quickly without having to read 12 books yourself, but be able to have the Cliff Notes version. The essentials. What do you really want to know, and what can you communicate to your client in the moment that's going to guide them towards the different shifts using these points? So the helpful categories were the name, the nickname, which is kind of fun, what meridian they happen to be on, because the different meridians are associated with different feelings, they're associated with different thoughts, they're associated with different physical contributors. What sensations do they help with? Physical issues do they help with? What emotional components do they help with? And then also special properties. Like sometimes there's unique combinations of these points that help with certain things, and other times there's just unique applications for unique types of issues, such as insomnia, fatigue, chronic pain. All these, there's different things that these acupressure points can assist with, and it's all synthesized in one Google sheet that has the name, the nickname, the meridian that it's on, the physical issues, the emotional issues, and the special properties. So all 43 of these things are broken down in that manner so that within the context of a session, without flipping through a bunch of things or doing anything else, you can call up this quick Google sheet and you've got talking points for every single one of these acupressure points at your fingers. Not only are they broken down according to those categories, but I also organize them according to region of the body. So I have the basic recipe EFT acupressure points, which are the ones we pointed at earlier. They're primarily on your face and in upper torso and mid torso. But there's also a lot more that are on your face and on your head. There's different ones that are on your arms and your hands. There's different ones that are on your torso. And there's different ones that are on your legs and your feet. So they're organized not only in that synthesis of that flow, but also by the different regions, because that's going to make a difference for areas that are accessible to your clients. I mean, some people are going to have difficulty reaching this point. So there are other ones that they can get to that are much easier for them. There's going to be different things that you're going to want for application. Like somebody who's experiencing anxiety in public speaking, you know, you don't want to tell them that they can just go like this the whole time to help them, because you're going to look like a weirdo standing in front of a group of people, like going like this, trying to calm your anxiety down. But if you happen to be standing in a podium, well, can you access this point right here and put them below that podium? So you're getting that sense of relaxation, you're getting that sense of safety, but you're doing it in a context in which you're not drawing attention to yourself. Nobody's going to be noticing these things. So you want to be able to tailor the relief, tailor what the person can do, and apply not only within the session, but outside of the session. And you're going to have make those choices and help guide your client to make those choices based upon the application. Those 8 acupressure points, while they are extremely valuable within a session, they're extremely valuable for creating a cognitive shift and guiding the person towards realizing their issue in a different manner. They're not always socially acceptably applied in the context of your day-to-day life, but one of these 43 points most likely is, and that can make a big difference for people. But not only do you want those on a Google sheet that you can reference, I mean, it's nice for you to know. It's nice to have that synthesis for you to be able to pass on to your client, but you're not going to be walking around with these people 24 hours a day. You're going to want them to have something as a reference, something that they can use, something that they can call up. And there's one ubiquitous thing that we all have in our lives now that we're basically inseparable from, and that is your cell phone. So for each of these points, I went and I designed a cell phone wallpaper, something that could be downloaded and emailed as an attachment to your client. And when they download that to their phone and they call up, they have the information for these specific points right there on their phone. Something that they can look at, something that they can be reminded of, something that they can use not only as a reminder of the shifts that they've done, but also the shifts that they experienced with you as a practitioner in that session. So it's going to help them in their life. It's also going to create a way in which to remember the work that they did with you. And it's also something that they'll probably show their friends. You know, this is the point that helps me. I was thinking this way, and now I'm able to access this point and remember the shifts that I had during the EFT session, and now I'm able to apply it and look at it. As for specific applications, there are several different ways that you can use this. I mean, there's several different applications, but I've got 3 main favorites, 3 main ways that I like to use these acupressure points in sessions with clients. And one of them is creative grounding techniques. A lot of times you'll have people who will show up for sessions and show up to work with you, and they're going to come in hot. Like they're going to come in stressed out. They're going to come in like not ready to communicate and talk about their issue in any sort of way that is beneficial to them. And it's not their fault. I mean, they're being triggered. They're probably having a difficult day. And they're with you and they're working with you because they're struggling in an area, in an aspect of their life. And when they show up like that, it's very, very helpful. It's very, very handy to have a very short, we're talking like less than 5 minutes, preferably closer to 2, little techniques where we can use the different acupressure points, usually in combination with some type of visualization or breathing technique that's going to take them from I'm at a 10 and I'm flipping out about my issue down to a level at which we can begin to talk about, we can begin to access, we can begin to explore in a way that isn't going to trigger them even more to the point where the work that you're doing together is compromised. The work that you're doing together isn't as effective as it could be. Another use that you can do is within sessions. So sometimes you'll be working on a certain issue and you'll be at a sticking point where the client just isn't making the progress that you were hoping that they would make, or something feels stuck, the energy isn't quite moving right. And sometimes just switching up the acupressure points and adding in an alternate one to your typical sequence can make a difference for people. But which point you choose, you have to think about that. You want to select something that, first off, the client can actually access given their range and mobility, and you want to have something that corresponds, is associated with their issue. And this research is going to help you to guide and make that selection for an alternate point to add into your typical tapping sequence. And the third one I want to talk about, the third use, is borrowed from neuro-linguistic programming, a technique called anchoring. So when we do anchoring, what we're looking to do is anchor a shift in cognition, a shift in emotion. I used to feel this way about my issue. I used to think this about my issue, but through the course of the EFT session, now I think this, and now I feel that, which is great for within the session. But we want to anchor that shift. We want to anchor those emotions. We want to anchor those thoughts into a single point. So you can do this anchoring through a combination of things. You want to have what the person's shift in cognition is. How are they thinking differently about this issue? And you want to combine that with how are they emotionally feeling. They used to feel certain emotions and feelings of stress or of limit or of lack, and now they are thinking about this and feeling about this in a different way. So we want to combine their different thoughts with their different emotions, and we want to associate that with a single point that they can access and recall those things. So you're anchoring in those shifts, so that way when they're out and they're in their day-to-day world, and they come across something that would previously have been a trigger, something that would previously send them into that stress response, send them into that pattern that they no longer want to have. Well, that's going to happen when they leave the session. That's going to happen when they return to their day-to-day world. If they don't have something to do, they don't have a strategy, they don't have a way in which to recall those shifts, they're not going to make the long-term change in their life as quickly. So we can use these alternate acupressure points as a single point that can serve as an anchor to those shifts in cognition, that can serve as an anchor to those shifts in emotion, that they can easily and quickly access when they realize in their day-to-day life that they've fallen down that old pattern. Because once they start to interrupt it, and once they start to feel the elevated emotions with that interrupting, and if you start doing that over and over and over again, and you repeat that, well, now you've stopped rehearsing the stressful pattern, and you've started to rehearse the chosen pattern, how I want this to go. And when we do that often enough, and when your client does that often enough, they will rewire their neural pathways in their brain. Their automatic reaction will no longer be one of stress. It'll be one of empowerment. All right, so that was a brief overview of the potential for using alternate acupressure points in your clinical EFT sessions. So if you have any additional questions, something that wasn't covered, something that was unclear, you can visit my website at subconsciouseft.com. You scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a way to send me a direct message, and I am happy to answer any and all of your questions or inquiries as it relates to EFT, EFT sessions, and alternate acupressure points.